Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Before the Altar, when we gather literally before the altar here at St. Peter's Church at Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish. And I'm blessed to be joined today by Jenn Deane. How are you, Jenn?
Good. Blessed to be here. Thank
Yes,
you for this chance.
and this is a time for us just to hang out, to have a chat, and for you to give us your questions live. And so it's great to have you with us. Now, Jenn is one of our relatively new staff members. Jenn, I was thinking it was July?
Yep,
Beginning
July
of
5th.
July.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's an unusual job. You know, in all the parishes I've ever been, I've always dreamt about it, about having a staff member designated to support the social outreach efforts of a parish but I've never been able to do it. And through certain set of circumstances here at Our Lady of Guadalupe, we were able to invest in this area. And Jenn, it's been amazing to have you on team. So before I go any further, tell us, who is Jenn Deane?
That's a big question. Well, my family and I, we immigrated to Nova Scotia back in 2007. So we've been here for almost 14 years and been parishioners here at this parish for about 10. When we first got here, we were a bit of a roaming Catholic family. But when we moved to Dartmouth, we decided, and especially as our kids got older, that we needed a central place to call home, and that became St. Peter's Church.
And you, where were you living before you came to Canada?
Prior to that, we were living in Colorado State, and
Oh,
a
wow.
couple of years before that, David and I were both in Ireland.
Yeah, Roman Catholics indeed.
Yes.
And where were your children born? Were they born in?
Our oldest, Sophia, was born in Colorado, but we smuggled our second child across the border. She was still in the womb at that time, so Cora was born here in Halifax, as was Anya, our youngest.
Oh, okay, good,
Yeah.
good. And you've been in this parish for about 10 years now, and now on staff. What is social outreach coordinator? What is that? What is your job?
It's a really good question. That role has been incredibly dynamic since I started. And for me, it's come to be connecting all of the ministries that are ongoing in this parish, but also looking outward to the needs within the community, connecting with other groups that are not within the parish that are active in Dartmouth. And there are so many incredibly gifted and talented and caring and compassionate people in this community, and I get the privilege to work with them and hopefully bring their mission and ministry to the next level and to connect them with supporters and grow the story and the work that they're currently doing. And I think this role, I've seen advertisements for this role in other parishes now. I think it's going to start to become very important to parishes. As you know, the narrative of the Catholic Church, especially here in Canada, has been particularly unfavorable. And part of the role for me as an outreach coordinator is to make sure that the stories about what we're doing in the community, who we really are as Catholics, is out there.
I've often thought about that for a number of years now, like in terms of breaking through this narrative that is focused on the failings of certain members of the church. So we need a corporate witness that is gonna in a sense be noticed, which is, it kind of challenges us because, you know, there's two sayings of Jesus. Where on the one hand, Jesus said, you know, don't do your good works to be seen by others.
Yeah.
Do it in secret. And then he also says, let your light shine. Don't put a light under a bushel basket.
Yeah.
How do you resolve those two tensions?
So that's a great point. I was very lucky to grow up in a Christian family of people who loved God. And it would have been unusual when I was a kid going to school for someone to not be Christian of some denomination. I know that's not the case now. My kids live in a secular world. And so the idea of them doing good works as Christians and Catholics in the community for some sort of social kudos, that doesn't exist anymore. So it's important that no matter how uncomfortable it makes us, that we put ourselves in front of cameras and we tell the story of why we're here. I think, it's wonderful what the bishop has been doing, getting out in the news and talking about the homeless issue. And I'm sure he's as uncomfortable doing that as I am here today.
Yeah.
But we have an obligation to our children and to the future of the Catholic Church to do that, to tell our story, to talk about the work that's going on.
I think, Jen, often the incredible work that St. Vincent de Paul Society does in many parishes, including
Yeah.
our own, in many ways, it leans towards that first saying of Jesus about your good works being done in secret, because the
Right.
St. Vincent de Paul, even in most parishes, people don't realize what they do.
Yeah.
And the world out there generally, I mean, people would understand the Salvation Army, okay? So they're very visible, they do amazing work, but they're in a sense, even non-churchgoers know who they are and they know what they do. Very few people have any idea what St. Vincent de Paul does, and yet the sheer magnitude, if you were to add it all up, and even in our diocese alone, it would be enormous.
Yeah, and that is right and just. I don't want to say that it isn't. Doing those works without the light being shown on it is the absolute right thing to do. But we are at a point where there's something called social capital. And if I do something just on behalf of Jenn Deane and I put it out there on Facebook, I run the risk of it being about me. And so if I don't do it on behalf of Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish, on behalf of the church, then we run the risk
Well,
of
so
that
St.
social
Paul says
capital.
we're ambassadors for Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't, even if we're motivated by faith, we don't act of ourselves and for ourselves. We're part of one body. Our corporate identity is almost, in one sense, more important than our individual identity when we go into the public square, to live out our faith. What was it that attracted you to apply for this position? Because you were gainfully employed somewhere else. What was it about this idea that grabbed you?
I was gainfully employed with a wonderful organization. Many people know Chalice Canada. And before that, I had been working with Mater Care International, which is another Catholic nonprofit focused on maternal health. For the last decade, I've known that I really wanted to only work with Catholic organizations. I'd worked with other organizations that were very good, but I always felt that I was having to compromise somewhere. So my focus was continuing to work with Catholic churches and Catholic organizations.
If it's appropriate for you to say, what did you feel was the compromise that was, in a sense, I don't know, what kind of compromise did you feel that you were being forced to make? Or I don't know if that's the best way to put the question.
I think there are some issues that are specific to the Catholic faith. And I grew up Baptist, and I've had friends and family of many different denominations. And some of the organizations I worked with, they were doing good work, but there was a fear of doing good work on behalf of the name Jesus. So people didn't want to put that out there. And again, I felt that if we couldn't say that out loud and be true to that, then we were either allowing the organization to be the front man and not ourselves as individuals, or we were making ourselves as individuals this thing to follow, and we weren't connected to the greater story of who Christ was.
It's so important, it's that idea that any act of love or service done anywhere is always, in one sense, a form of pre-evangelization, in the sense that it's an act of love, and it opens people up to even ask the question, well, why do you do this? Because it's an important question, is why? What motivates you? And Scripture says, always have your answer ready for the people who ask the reason for your hope. So it's not that we're going around saying, I'm not going to help you unless you come to this prayer meeting or unless you let me talk to you about Jesus. But at the same time, if we're almost like undercover Christians where you're not allowed to speak the name, there's something off about that as well.
Yeah, and Christian life is about a relationship with Christ, and that's not simply a yes to Jesus in your life. It's also embodied actions.
Yeah.
So when you want a relationship with Christ, you don't just mirror who Christ was in the world. It's in your love and care of the poor that you develop that relationship. So Christ wasn't just serving the poor, he was also the poor, if that makes sense.
We have 35 streams with us right now. Now, come on, folks. There must be questions you're dying to ask Jen. So pop your questions in the chat box, and we'll keep going here. So you've been on the job now for
about 4 months now.
4 months,
4
and this was one
months.
of these jobs. It's like paint. Like you gotta you gotta create your own reality, because
Yeah.
it was like, Jen, we've got this idea, this dream, no idea how we're going to do it, and you've come in now. So in the midst of that kind of uncertainty or that creative space, what does a typical day look like for you, or maybe a typical days, if that would be a bit easier?
A typical day is following up on all the ministries that are going on that we're working with, but also connecting with some of the other Dartmouth organizations. There's always something going on in our community, and we happen to live in one of the most socially deprived communities in the whole of Nova Scotia. Capital Health did an assessment back in 2014, and they used a methodology that illustrated that Dartmouth, and specifically North Dartmouth, suffered from social deprivation. Now, that's measured by things like being a widow, not having family living nearby, being unemployed, not having access to a vehicle. So there's social deprivation, and then we as Christians recognize that there's spiritual deprivation, which we suffer from regardless of our material status. And so there's a real need in this community for community. There's a need to connect with one another and to build those relationships. So what I have tried to do over the last 4 months is to connect not only with those within our parish, but with other churches, with other organizations that are operating, and to see where are we overlapping. I know there's a limited amount of resources. How can we be more successful with what we have? And that's been a big part of the job.
I'm starting to get a few questions in now.
Okay.
So if I can hold my iPhone far enough away, these old eyes here. But Philip is asking, hey Philip, is there much coordination or cooperation with other parishes, other Catholic parishes so far?
That's a good question. And yes, Philip, there certainly is. We are connecting with some of the other parishes who may or may not be experiencing homeless in their direct community, but they have a heart for it. They know what the bishop is doing. They know it's one of his priorities this year to focus on homelessness. So they want to help. So any projects that we are involved with, we're connecting with other parishes. And there's a real openness to that. There are projects within Dartmouth that have always existed cross parishes, and those projects are continuing as well.
Could you give us an example of those?
The Backpack Project is one of those projects that was initiated by St. Peter's, but now is run by Divine Mercy Parish, and we're happy to be able to contribute to that. And we are just now sort of in conversation with Christ the King about what we can do around homelessness. They recognize they might not have that issue in their geographical community, but we're all one church.
Yes.
So if we have something that's going on here that they can contribute to, they're happy to do that. And I'm glad to be that point of contact for them. And then beyond our parishes, there are also Anglican churches very near us who also are going through the same issues we're going through. And again, there are limited resources, there are a limited number of people, and the need is huge. So we can only do this collaboratively.
Absolutely. And I think that, there was a day when perhaps parishes sought to do things by themselves, but collaboration has got to be more than just with other Catholic parishes. I mean,
Right.
we've got to be, in the name of Christ, our common witness, because we all know this, that when you watch TV or movies, it's funny how people who are not within the church, they view believers, they kind of mush us all together. Like you get the Baptist preacher waving a rosary, set of rosary beads, or at a low Protestant church, you've got a crucifix with a corpus of Jesus on it. It's like, okay, they don't understand they don't understand our differences. They see us as one. Mm-hmm. And I think the world generally sees, I think the world sees Christians more as one than we see ourselves sometimes. And so, I mean, aside from the fact that Jesus has commanded us to pursue unity, and the church teaches that this kind of arena is a real place where we can stand together. I think for the sake of witness and effectiveness, we've got to do this together. Has there been what kind of partnerships have opened up so far with other Christian groups?
Well, obviously, there was also the Dartmouth North Christian Food Bank, and that is our partnership with, used to be First Baptist Church, now it's Life Branch Church, and they are going to be celebrating their grand opening of their new location November 14th. We're partnering with Holy Trinity Anglican Church to do clothing drives out there in North Dartmouth. We're partnering with Christ Church here to talk about homelessness again. We're not quite clear what our plan is going to be there yet, but it's something that we're working together on to move forward, because the poor will unfortunately always be with us, but we must respond. There must be a compassionate, loving response there. And I think if we don't do it unified, what we risk is that we are duplicating services. And when we duplicate services, it's not efficient.
That's right. That's right. We do have a question from a certain person online who's asked this. Have you ever won a theological argument with your husband?
I think I know who that person is.
I
think
to
I've
some
won.
viewers who your husband is.
My husband is Dr. David Deane, and I'm very lucky to have him. While he's not handy, we always have wonderful conversations at home. I know that we're always on the same page when it comes to our beliefs and the way that we raise our kids, and that's a gift. And it's a joy to be with him. Most people will know that I converted to Catholicism when I was 24, after David and I started dating. I grew up Baptist, and then we kind of fell away from the church as a family, and so I wasn't practicing any particular belief when I converted, but he is certainly a big part of that, and he was one of my sponsors, actually, when I was baptized and confirmed into the Catholic Church. So I think I might have won a few, but time will tell, I guess.
Obviously, you bring a big conviction into this role. How would you explain? Like, we have watching today many parishioners, people who are not members of the parish as well. But speaking about theological arguments, what theological argument would you make for the case that social outreach, as we've been talking about, why it matters?
Well, the Gospels tell us in really no uncertain terms that it's our obligation as Christians to love our neighbors, to visit the sick, to visit the imprisoned, to care for the poor, to give the coats off of our backs if needed. And in practicing those corporal works of mercy, we develop a deeper relationship with Christ. There's a great quote from C.S. Lewis, and I don't know if he actually said it or if it was just in the film The Shadowlands, where he's talking about prayer, and he said, "It doesn't change God, it changes me." And I believe that about acts of charity as well, that the acts of charity may or may not have a lasting impact on the individual that you're trying to love and serve, but they change you. So in that sense, an act of charity is always the right thing to do. It changes you, it develops that relationship with Christ that you're hungry for, and it's the only way that we can really come to know Christ as who he fully is.
So, this weekend we had the gospel reading where Jesus is asked, what's the most important commandment? And he quotes the famous passage of Deuteronomy known as the Shema, which speaks about, the first response to God is love.
Yes.
The Lord is God, the Lord alone, and you shall love, and with all of your mind, your heart, your strength. But then Jesus, of course, adds this. Immediately says, and there's a second, love your neighbor as yourself. Like, and the point is that you for Christians, you can't separate. The New Testament says that how can we love? I think it's in 1 John. How can we claim to love a God we cannot see if we don't love the people that we do see? This is, I sense, Jen, this is more for you than just a theological conviction. This is deep for you. I mean, there's different. For instance, most people, like on the parish staff, like we would all agree with you. We would all agree with this point, but yet you're in this role, and we're in different roles. Has this always been in your heart? Like how?
I think that my entire life I've been having a conversation with Christ. In the Baptist community, it was always you ask Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. I'm sure some of you have heard that line before. And I did that almost every night as a child, thinking that last night probably didn't take. How can I do it again tonight? So I've always had that conversation, but I've always, for a long period of my life, I was a receiver of charity. My mom became a single mom early on, and my school supplies were provided by the Salvation Army, and they did a beautiful thing where they brought mothers and children in to receive school supplies, but held it as a raffle. So as an 8-year-old child, I thought I won my
Yes.
school supplies. What that did is it allowed me to continue to have dignity about the gifts that had been given to me. And I get a little choked up here because it's just, that's the goal. It's giving financially, giving in charitable contributions. It's not receiver and giver. It's a relationship there. And there's a wonderful quote by St. Vincent de Paul again that, we ask the poor to forgive us the bread that we give them. Because social inequality is not justice. And when we see that injustice in the world, our hearts cry out. We know there's something wrong there. And to say yes to that crying out is what we see when we see outreach as it should be.
It reminds me of the word compassion, or even when Jesus saw the crowds like sheep without a shepherd, that compassion. Well, the literal word in English means to suffer with. And so it's the work we do with those in need. It can't just be this kind of condescending activity that sometimes can actually even be self-serving, because it makes me feel good, or I feel justified or relieved or whatever. But it's ultimately we make it about ourselves. We have a few more questions here. Question here from Doreen is, have you heard of the movie Purgatory? It was shown all week in the U.S. in the theaters. Would it be possible to get this movie for our community? Have you heard of that?
I haven't heard of that film. Have you heard of that film?
Doreen, haven't heard about it? I'll have to check it out.
Email it to me, Doreen, and we'll have a look and see.
Hope it's not purgatorial to watch. I think I've heard something about it, but I can't remember what it was I heard.
Okay.
So that would mean perhaps I didn't really hear at all. Martha asks, involvement in serving is key to follow Christ. Do you see any ways we could motivate others to participate in an active way? Big question for any parish, because often in most parishes you've got a fairly small group of people who do so many things. How do we motivate people to get involved in serving?
That's where I think some of my background and skills can be useful. Director of Communications with Mater Care was all about telling the story. A lot of the work we were doing was happening in Africa. Now, I can't go to Africa and work as a nurse in a hospital. It's just not my skill. But what I can do is I can tell that story, tell those women's stories that are there in the hospital in a powerful way that attracts people to want to be involved. And we saw that through refugee sponsorship here in our parish when I was involved. And we have seen that in other outreach that we're doing now. I think it's about the story, but it's also about just, again, making sure that we're all vocal. We're vocal about what we're doing and why we're doing it, because we're at a time in our history where to be pious is not a social reward. Yes. So we can put that aside. We don't have to worry about not, wearing our ashes on Ash Wednesday even, because it's such an anomaly. You wear your ashes. I have to pick up my kids at the bus stop, and people go, Jen, you've got a little something on your forehead. And that's an opportunity to talk to them about what Ash Wednesday is and who I am and what Catholicism means to me. So I think it's about being more vocal, being unafraid to talk about the work that we're doing, but also to tell the stories of the people and the individuals that we're working with. People are connected to other people.
And what are you as you look ahead, what are you most excited about right now about this position and the opportunity that it represents?
There is so much potential in Dartmouth. Dartmouth, unlike, and I've lived here longer than I've lived anywhere else in the world. Dartmouth as a community has such a strong identity, and people are proud of Dartmouth, and people are proud to be members of this community. And that shows great potential, because when there are homeless sleeping on our steps, then I know that the people of Dartmouth are already motivated to care for their neighbor. And so I think if we can bring that motivation into something that's structured, that easily enables people to get supporters, to raise money, to do the work that needs to be done, that's a potential I see, and I know that it's there. We talk about how can we get people involved with outreach. Well, not everyone can serve at the food bank. Maybe they don't have the physical capability to do it. Maybe they don't have the time. So we have to make sure we're providing opportunities for people to be involved, whether it's financially, whether it's actually on the ground doing the work, whether it's just telling the story or sharing it with family and friends. And that's where I think I can be helpful.
And the Archbishop, it just so happened that he came out with these 4 pastoral priorities. One was evangelization, the other was parish identity, catechesis, and homelessness. It's very much put on his heart, I think in a very timely way, and he's called parishes to try to respond. And for us, I'm just so grateful that we just, had you in place to be able to respond. And so maybe a bit of, I know we're planning to communicate this more to parishioners the next couple of weeks, but maybe give us a little teaser about what's to come and what our parish is doing in response to the Archbishop's request.
So the Archbishop has asked us to respond to homelessness and its root causes. So some of the root causes of homelessness can be mental health issues. They can be single motherhood. Single motherhood is the #1 determining factor as whether or not you live below the poverty line or not. So when we work with women and children, when we work with people with mental health issues, we're also helping to offset homelessness. But in addition to that, and that is work that we're currently doing, we have the Mental Health Support Group, which is a pilot program that I'm hoping to expand in the new year, where we're talking about what we can do for single mothers, and we're talking about what that might look like at St. Anthony's. We are also looking at the shelters, which is a project that the Archdiocese has put together, which is the Emergency Shelter Project. Right now, there are 9 people living in emergency shelters in Nova Scotia, but there are 22 on the waiting list.
So what exactly are emergency shelters?
Emergency shelters are just that. They're essentially an insulated small building with an egress window and an open door, and they keep people from literally freezing to death. They are not nice places to live. I wouldn't want to live there myself. And so the people who choose to move into those locations don't really have many other options. But our shelter system is at max capacity. So this is a response. Is it the perfect response? Is it the solution? No. But this is a temporary solution to literally keep people from dying this winter.
And we're looking at having maybe some of those.
And we are. We're looking at what our capacity is as a church to place some of those buildings at our parish. We're also looking again, like working with other communities, other parishes to help the people who live in those buildings. Because again, it's not just about here's the shelter, there you go. It's about here's the shelter. How can I get to know you as a person and get to know your needs so that we talk about the next step for you? Because these are very temporary solutions to very long problems.
Jenn, we just got a few minutes left, and if anyone wants to maybe try to put in a final question, but as you contemplate the future, you're on the ground, you've been on the ground now long enough, and what do you dream of? What's your dream for what our parish could be doing in this realm?
My dream is that our parish is recognized as the go-to place for people who need love and support.
Wow.
If people said, oh, I need something, those guys, those people out there at Our Lady of Guadalupe, they'll take care of you. Look how they love one another. That's what I want people to see when they see us. In addition to that, I also have a slightly bigger dream that I could connect with outreach coordinators of other parishes, because as new as this role is, we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time someone gets hired into this position. And there's a lot to be learned from one another. I had the privilege to speak to someone who's down in Salem, Massachusetts, who's working in this role, and his parish has very different challenges than ours, but we were able to talk to one another and learn from one another. And I think there's real opportunity there to connect and to see ourselves not just locally as Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish, but how are we responding to the needs of our communities in Nova Scotia and in the US and maybe across the world one day?
Jen, what would you say to someone who's listening to you right now, or maybe watching the replay later on and saying, you know what, this speaks to my soul, it speaks to my spirit, like I wanna do
Yes.
something, but I don't know what to do, I don't know how to do it, I don't know where to begin.
Call me.
Phone
Call
number
me.
right here.
Yeah.
Phone number here.
Call me. That's exactly what happened when the Syrian refugee crisis hit. People saw those stories in the news and their hearts said, what can I do? And that's where we saw refugee sponsorship groups come together like never before in our parishes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, our time is at an end, Jen. We've got a lot of people giving their amen to your dream and recognizing the wonderful work that you're doing. Thank you for this discussion from Lise Coleman and the information. Let's pray this dream comes to fruition. So what a great vision. You know, it ties in with, you know, we don't have as a parish yet at a kind of a formal vision statement or something, but I remember about a year ago what came to me in prayer was this idea of the heart, our parish to be the heart of Dartmouth and everything that a heart represents of love, care, and compassion. So I love this idea that we would have a reputation for being
That's right.
the people, the place where you're going to be loved and supported.
And I appreciate you saying the work that I'm doing, but really, again, there are ministries that have existed here for decades before I ever set foot in this place, and it's the work that we're doing and what we can do collectively. And so I appreciate this opportunity to be on the team with staff, and also to just be a more active parishioner and to devote the time and skills that I have to something that I think I can really be involved with and help with move forward.
Well, everyone, thanks for joining us today for this edition of Before the Altar. We're still experimenting with this format, but I think it's going quite well, and we'll let you know soon who our next guest is. But I want to thank Jen for being here, and please pray for her ministry. It's challenging, but it's incredibly exciting, and it's definitely worthwhile, of course. So God bless all of you, and take care.
Thank you.